A city on the brink. In the summer of 1683, all eyes had turned to Vienna, a house that stood at the last frontier between the mighty Ottoman Empire and the heart of Western Europe. For decades, the Ottoman Empire had been expanding without stop, its armies sweeping across the Balkans and appearing at the point of overwhelming Europe. Now they were standing at the gates of Vienna, ready to strike the fatal blow. The stakes couldn't have been bigger. Vienna wasn't just a city. It was symbolic to the whole universe. To the Ottoman Empire, this was its next great conquest. It was a doorway into Western Europe, while for the Christian states of Europe, Vienna had to remain the line that must not be crossed. If Vienna fell, nothing would stop the Ottomans in storming right through Germany and Italy onto the rest of Western Europe. So, how did Vienna defy the might of such an empire? And why is this siege not one of the many encounters, but a juncture that shifted power between the East and West? It all goes to understanding the motive forces that clashed on this field of Armageddon. The world before the siege. By the late 17th century, the Ottoman Empire had grown into an imposing behemoth, a gigantic, sprawling empire stretching across 3 continents. The width over 3 continents, Europe, Asia and Africa, was a colossus of its time, fully reflected in enormous riches, a formidable army, and influence that inspired awe amongst its neighbours. Its armies, with their state-of-the-art technology and unparalleled organisation, were nearly unstoppable. In its heyday, under the leadership of such visionaries as Suleiman the Magnificent, it dominated trade, politics and warfare, leaving an indelible mark on one of history's greatest empires. But for all their power, one prize had always eluded the Ottomans: Vienna. This city, at the crossroads of Europe, was more than a strategic stronghold. It was a symbol of resistance against Ottoman expansion, and the empire had tried once before to seize it. In 1529, in what was known as the First Siege of Vienna, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent himself led a massive campaign to bring the city under Ottoman control. Despite his brilliance and that of his forces, the siege was to eventually fail. Fierce resistance put up by Vienna's defenders, coupled with logistic challenges and the arrival of inclement weather, forced Suleiman to retreat. That retreat was not the surrender of ambition, but a reminder that the Ottomans' eyes were still fixed on Europe. Throughout the next 100 years, they worked tirelessly to extend their foothold in the Balkans, pressing ever closer towards Central Europe. Bit by bit, they chipped away at European defences, establishing control over key territories such as Hungary, and menacing the very heart of the continent. Thus, Vienna, almost organically, turned into the next logical target, because it would unlock the door towards Germany to the northwest and Italy to the southwest. Meanwhile, Europe was in disarray. The continent was riddled with division and distrust. The 30 Years' War had left much of Central Europe devastated, its cities in ruins, and its populations depleted. This brutal conflict, fought between Catholics and Protestants, had fractured Europe's powers, leaving them vulnerable to outside threats. Instead of putting up a united front against the ever-expanding Ottoman presence, many nations of Europe were preoccupied with their very own battles of supremacy. Thus, the Habsburg monarchy, controlling Austria and Vienna, felt somewhat abandoned, trying to defend against an empire that had apparently unlimited resources. While Europe squabbled, the Ottomans prepared. Under the impetus of the energetic and ambitious Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Empire assembled one of the most sumptuous and far-reaching military adventures the Empire had ever mustered. Kara Mustafa was no ordinary leader. He was a dreamer of great conquests, an excellent tactician, and a ruthlessly ambitious statesman. For him, Vienna was more than a strategic target. It was a precious stone to be fitted into the crown of the Ottomans, a city whose fall would engrave his name in history and further consolidate the domination of the empire in Europe. By 1683, the time was ripe. The Ottomans mustered an army estimated at almost 150,000 men, one of the largest forces ever assembled to that date. The scale of this campaign was unprecedented. With the elite janissaries, cavalry units, artillery and sappers ready for the siege of the city, Vienna was isolated. Its defences were undermanned, and its allies were scattered. To many, the fall of Vienna seemed inevitable. But dear as the city itself was, there was far more at stake. If Vienna fell, the road to Germany and Italy would be exposed, and with it, the heart of Europe. European leaders realized how grave the situation was. Unfortunately, they could not mobilize an unlimited response. The fear of uncertainty spread across the continent as reports of the huge Ottoman army reached far and wide. Yet, with all their might, the Ottomans stumbled upon a resistance that would change the course of history. It is here that one of the most dramatic battles of the 17th century was staged. The stakes could hardly be greater. Vienna fought, quite literally, not only for survival, but to try to stem the tide of Ottoman expansion which has swept across Europe for centuries. What transpired next would not only seal the fate of a city, but would also mark a turning point in the balance of power between East and West. Stay with us as we unravel the story of the Siege of Vienna, a battle that would shape the future of Europe and the Ottoman Empire forever. The siege begins. The Ottoman advance. The Siege of Vienna by the Ottoman army happened in July 1683. Under the command of Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, it was terribly outnumbered, for it had but 15,000 defenders to meet the impossible odds of an attacking force of many hundreds of thousands of troops. The Ottomans were supported with colossal siege guns and sappers trained to dig tunnels under and hence undermine city walls. In Vienna, conditions turned desperate. Supplies were running out, diseases spread, and morale reached a low. Yet the defenders, knowing what would happen to their city and their way of life if they gave in, held firm. Confident of victory, the Ottomans pressed on, tightening their noose around Vienna. But the defenders of the city had one advantage. They knew reinforcements were coming. The Holy League was an alliance of Christian powers formed to stop the Ottoman advance. At its head was King Jan Sobieski of Poland, a brilliant military commander at the head of one of the most feared cavalry forces in Europe, the Polish Winged Hussars. The turning point, the Battle of Vienna. September the 12th, 1683, broke over the fields around Vienna in tense stillness. For 2 months now, the Ottoman Empire had laid siege to it, and the defenders were barely holding out. Supplies were running low, disease was rampant, and morale was fragile. Inside the city walls, civilians and soldiers alike waited for the end, fearing that Vienna's fall would open all floodgates to Ottoman expansion into Western Europe. But that day, the winds of fate were to blow in a different direction. The stakes for both sides. For the Ottoman Empire, this was a campaign of monumental ambition. The Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha leading an army of over 150,000 soldiers, believed Vienna was the key to unlock all of Europe. Capturing the city would not only solidify Ottoman control over Central Europe, but also pave the way for conquest into Germany and Italy. Kara Mustafa envisaged himself returning to Istanbul as a hero, his name forever etched into the annals of Ottoman glory. For Vienna and the Holy League, the stakes were equally dire. The city was more than a stronghold. It was a symbol of resistance, a line in the sand against Ottoman expansion. Its fall would be a catastrophic blow to Christendom, and a triumph for the empire that had been Europe's greatest rival for centuries. If Vienna collapsed, there was little doubt that the Ottomans would press deeper into the heart of Europe. The arrival of the Holy League. This was a campaign of monumental ambition for the Ottoman Empire. According to the Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, who led more than 150,000 soldiers, Vienna was the key to all of Europe. Its capture would consolidate Ottoman control over Central Europe and open ways for further conquest into Germany and Italy. Kara Mustafa dreamed of returning to Istanbul as a hero, his name etched forever into the annals of Ottoman glory. The stakes were just as grim for Vienna and the Holy League. The city stood for more than a stronghold. It was an icon of resistance, a line in the sand against Ottoman expansion. Its fall would be a catastrophic blow to Christendom and a triumph for the empire that had been Europe's greatest rival for centuries. With Vienna fallen, there was little doubt the Ottomans would press deep into the heart of Europe. The battle begins. At dawn, the Holy League attacked. The battle was filled with heavy fighting along the Ottoman lines, as Austrian and German infantry clashed in blood with Ottoman troops. The Ottomans, though surprised, resisted strongly. The Janissaries and other elite units stood their ground stubbornly. Cannon smoke and musket volleys smoked up the air. On the ground, the wounded and dead littered the area. By mid-morning, it was clear which way the battle had gone. The Holy League's forces started to push, compressing the Ottomans inch by painful inch. The difference in this coordinated coalition of varied languages and tactics paid ultimate dividends. Meanwhile, Kara Mustafa frantically tried to regroup his army with frantic orders to avoid encirclement. The cavalry charge of the winged hussars. The turning point in the battle came during the late afternoon. King Jan Sobieski was leading the coalition from the hills and saw this as the moment he had been waiting for. For the first time, the Ottoman lines began to falter. Their forces were stretched from trying to defend many positions. In a thunder of voice, Sobieski gave the order that would change history. Down the hills, like thunder, charged one of the most feared cavalry forces in Europe, the Polish winged hussars. These were warriors to behold, bedecked with towering feathered wings that created a deafening noise as they charged, both psychological and physical forces unto themselves. The armour glinted in the sun, with lances longer than those of most Europeans, which cut through enemy ranks with deadly precision. The charge of the winged hussars, numbering around 18,000, was one of the largest and most decisive cavalry charges in history. Smashing with incredible force into the Ottoman flanks, they tore through the lines and caused chaos in the enemy camp. Ottoman soldiers, caught off guard and overwhelmed, began to panic. What was once an organised siege army dissolved into chaos as troops fled in all directions. The retreat and defeat of Kara Mustafa. By night, the Ottoman army was in flight, leaving behind their sultan's luxurious tents and abandonment of artillery, with several thousand no more than victimised in their field flight. Pressed by dire defeat, Kara Mustafa fled. He knew well-deserved severe punishment after his failure amidst tatters of esteem. The loss was not commonly a defeat. The defeat was a crushing blow to the prestige of the Ottomans. It was said to be linked with their ceaseless urge on Europe. News of the defeat was received with fury in Constantinople. Kara Mustafa, blamed for the humiliation of the empire, was ordered strangled by the Ottoman Sultan. The defeat at Vienna thus marked not just the end of Kara Mustafa's ambitions, but indeed the beginning of the protracted decline of the Ottoman Empire. The victory at Vienna. The exhausted defenders of Vienna were in a celebratory mood. The hard-won victory was exhilarating. Against all expectations, the city had withstood the might of one of the largest armies in the world. To the Holy League, it was a triumph of unity and resolve, proof that Europe could stand together against a common foe. The Battle of Vienna was something more than just a military event. It was a turning point in history. It halted the Ottoman expansion into Europe, reversed the balance of power in favour of the Habsburgs, and signified the first step in what would become the downfall of the Ottoman Empire. More than anything else, it was a demonstration of the strength of resistance of a city, a coalition, and people defending their civilization. It was in this battle, the Siege of Vienna, that history was to record one of the most dramatic and far-reaching struggles of its era, a battle that would define the fate of Europe for the next centuries. Why the siege was a turning point. The victory at Vienna wasn't just a military success, but a defining moment in European history. For the Ottoman Empire, it was a point that marked the halt of its expansion into Europe. While the empire would remain a significant power for many centuries, it would never pose the same kind of existential threat to Europe again. To Europe, the victory marked a turning point in the long and bitter struggle between East and West. The Habsburg monarchy, which had led the defence of Vienna, emerged stronger, more consolidated, and influential in the Balkans. This defeat galvanised the European powers in their resistance against Ottoman control, and prepared the way for reconquest of the largest parts of southeastern Europe. The siege showed the strength of unity. Religious and political conflicts that had been tearing Europe asunder for centuries, Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, in Vienna stood up against a common enemy. Rarely does one find such unity. It was forcefully brought home at this moment that there was something which could be achieved if Europe stood as one. Broader consequences. The legacy of the siege. The Siege of Vienna left an indelible mark. For the Ottomans, it exposed weaknesses in their military and administration, forcing them to rethink their strategies. The empire entered a period of slow decline, losing territory and influence as European powers grew stronger. The victory at Vienna became a symbol of resistance and triumph in Europe. Legends and stories about the siege spread across the continent, shaping cultural memory. Even today, the battle is remembered as a moment when Europe came together to defend its borders. The siege also had unexpected cultural impacts. It is said that the croissant, in the shape of a crescent, was invented in Vienna to celebrate the defeat of the Ottomans. Whether this story is more myth than fact, reflects how deeply the siege resonated in European imagination. A defining moment in history. The Siege of Vienna was more than a battle. It was a turning point, one that would shape the course of history. It marked the beginning of the decline of the Ottoman Empire and the rise of the European powers that would dominate the modern world. It showed the power of unity in the face of overwhelming odds, and left a legacy that continues to influence our understanding of East and West. Imagine Europe today if Vienna had fallen. Where would have the balance of power shifted to? Interesting questions, no doubt, and it is appropriate that we put our minds to them now as we revel in this great juncture in history. Continue with us in the next lecture as we review the fallout of the siege and the rapidly changing dynamics in the world at the advent of the 17th century.